What's up, guys? I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I absolutely hated going to the Home Depot with my family. Oh my gosh, it felt like we just wandered around for hours and I was so bored out of my mind. Now, did you know there was a group of Israelites in the Bible that actually did something really similar too? They didn't have Home Depot back then, but they did have the desert, and they wandered around the desert for a long time. Home Depot, desert, yeah, I think they probably had it worse. Now, I want to tell you their story and how they wandered through the desert, but before that, I want to catch you up to where we are at in this story super quickly. Okay. So the Israelites were slaves in Egypt for 400 years. But there was this guy named Moses who was adopted into the royal family of the Pharaoh, and he was actually an Israelite too. So God told him that he needed to go to the Pharaoh and demand that he let all of the Israelite slaves go free. So he did. He went to the Pharaoh, he performed tons of miracles, and eventually he convinced the Pharaoh to let all of the thousands of slaves go free. But check it out. As soon as the Pharaoh said they could go, he changed his mind. His army is chasing all of the Israelites. So Moses parts the Red Sea, gets all of his people through, and as soon as they're on the other side, God closes the ocean waves and drowns all of Pharaoh's army. And they win. And here we are. God redeemed the slaves, set them free. Now all they had to do was get to the promised land that he told them that they would have. But guess what the Israelites did next? As soon as they were freed from captivity, their response was to complain. I know, that seems crazy, right? How could they complain after they just watched God and Moses do all of these amazing miracles? They're free, but now they're in the desert, and it only took 3 days for them to start to complain. So let's read it. We're going to open up our Bibles to Exodus. Read with me chapter 15, verse 22. Then Moses led the people of Israel away from the Red Sea, and they moved out into the desert of Shur. They traveled in this desert for 3 days without finding any water. When they came to the oasis of Marah, the water was too bitter to drink, so they called the place Marah, which means bitter. Then the people complained and turned against Moses. "What are we going to drink?" they demanded. So Moses cried out to the Lord for help, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. Moses threw it in the water, and this made the water good to drink. All right, so isn't this crazy? God literally just dried up the ocean of water for the Israelites to go through, and 3 days later, now they're complaining because they don't have something tasty to drink? They're on their way to the promised land, and anytime anything goes wrong, they complain to Moses. I totally get the desert is hot and it's dry, and they didn't have GPS back then, so their trip took them a lot longer to get to the promised land than they thought. It actually took them 40 years, and I would probably complain too, so I'm not blaming them. But what I find so fascinating is that it took them 40 years to get through the wilderness. We just watched God provide all of these miracles, so I know he could snap his fingers and get them to the promised land in a second. But he doesn't. He lets them go through the desert for 40 years. Why? You know what I think why? It's because God speaks to us in the desert. The Israelites needed to learn that they could truly trust God. It took a lot of miracles, a lot of time, a lot of complaining for them to understand that he was so trustworthy, that he was going to show up, that he was going to provide no matter what their need was. So they needed the desert to hear from God, because God speaks to us in the desert. When we're in our desert, when things aren't going the way we want to, when we're disappointed, let down, we don't get something we want, or maybe we feel like God is far away and we can't hear from him, what do? We complain. But you know what? Even in our desert, this is when God speaks to us. This is when God shows up in a way that we need to hear him. And only through the desert times can we learn and grow in these ways. I know it's been true for me. When I was in middle school, my desert was trying to find my identity, where I belonged, where I fit. And I looked for it in people groups, in niches. Did I fit with this group? Did I fit with that group? Who was I? Because I liked a lot of different things. And I felt like I didn't hear from God because I didn't get a clear answer of you fit in this group. And that's what I was looking for and searching for. But you know what? Those years it took me processing, wandering through the desert, God the whole time was telling me that it was good, that I didn't need to fit into one group or another, that I was a daughter of a king and my identity, my purpose belonged to him and in that. And it was a blessing that I could connect and relate to so many different people. It took me years to figure that out. And you know what? As I look back now, I'm glad I went through the desert for that time because it allowed me to know God and trust him and know myself in a way that I never would have before. I know sometimes when we're in the middle of the wilderness, it's really hard to process through it because we can't see God's perspective. We can only see ours. We only see what's right in front of us. But what's important is that we take a look back, that we take a different perspective and we see through God's eyes, where we can look back and remember God's goodness and his faithfulness so we can trust that no matter what comes today, tomorrow, or forever, he's gonna show up today, tomorrow, and forever, just like he did in the past. Because we can trust God, because he knows what's best for us. Even if we don't like it, sometimes the desert is what's best for us. Because that's when we learn to rely on him, we learn to trust him, we learn to hear his voice in ways that we wouldn't learn to any other way. So even though it doesn't feel good, sometimes the desert is good. See, we seek God more in the desert, in the wilderness. And so it's actually good for us. It grows us, it teaches us, and helps us grow closer to God, more reliant on him, and better people at the end of the day. So instead of just getting angry at God or blaming him when things don't go our way or complaining about our circumstances, instead seek him and take a different perspective. Look back and remember where God has shown up and faithful. See and ask him what he could be teaching you in this season that he can only teach you right now. So are you just gonna be angry with God and complain when things aren't going your way or they're hard? Or are you gonna lean in and seek him and grow closer to him through the desert and your time in the wilderness? The choice is up to you.